Romans 1 through 17. A couple of things right now. In the beginning of it, he's trying to establish who he is right now. Turn to my notes so I can watch that also. And could somebody read real quick verses 2 through 4?
Which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, concerning his Son, who is born a descendant of David according to the flesh, who is declared the Son of God with power by the resurrection from the dead, according to the Spirit of holiness, Jesus Christ our Lord.
What do you notice in those verses? Just anything about it.
Talking about prophets in the Holy Scriptures.
Talking about prophets. Talking about who else? What names used in there? Well, who's David. Okay. Who are these going to? Who are the prophets and David going to mean something to?
To the Jews.
To the Jews. They're not going to mean anything to Gentiles. Gentiles aren't going to say, "Oh yeah, King David." No, they don't really care. But the Jews are going to care about this. So the first thing he's doing is in verses 1 through 4, he's saying, I'm establishing my credential to the Jews. This isn't just some new religion coming in here. No, this is built on the foundation of the Old Testament, even though now it's very different in many ways, but it's built on that foundation, okay? So first thing he does is said, I have to establish my credentials. That's what he's doing. Secondly, if you read 5 and 6, somebody go ahead and read 5 and 6 real quick. Actually, you were doing well. Go ahead with 5 and 6, please.
All right. Through whom we have received grace and apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith among all the Gentiles for his name's sake, among whom you also are the called of Jesus Christ.
Right. First thing he's doing here is he's saying to the Jews, I have the authority to speak to you and I know your traditions. And then he's saying, oh, and by the way, I'm an apostle to the Gentiles, and you Gentiles are also saved the same way. This is big news to the Jews of that. I mean, I know they had it going on in their church, okay? But this was something totally new. Because remember what happened at the Jerusalem Council and everything with Peter. Peter goes before that, he sits down with Cornelius, sits down with the Gentiles and everything. Each of the Gentiles, right. Exactly. And then Peter gets there and, oh, those guys, I don't think I know them.
Yeah.
You know? No, that's not the way it's supposed to be. So my point is that this is something that was an ongoing issue throughout the church. And Paul had to say to start with, I'm here to talk to everybody and I've got the right to talk to you and I know where you're coming from. Basically, that's what he's saying right there. Now, we've actually already talked about this a little bit, about the relationship of the Jews and the Gentiles in the Roman Church. But can you think on a practical level, what do you think, knowing that it was Jews and Gentiles, knowing it was founded by Jews, taken over by Gentiles, the Jews came back into it, what do you think practical problems or issues might cause, or even good things either way?
Dissonance.
Okay, why though?
Because they have traditions, and then the Gentiles are probably a little bit more liberal,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's probably a lot of this
Friction.
Give me an example. Just an example, anything.
The food,
The food, okay, what about it?
Jews couldn't eat certain foods,
Right.
Gentiles.
Gentiles probably had no problems with bacon, pork, and ham.
Right.
I don't either. I'm going to go 3, okay. Matter of fact, one of my favorite dishes is candied pork loin that I make. That's another story. The point is, yeah, I do that for guests when I have them over a lot of times. Anyway, my point is that I have no problem eating pigs.
Right.
Okay? The Jews would have had a monster problem eating pig. And you know, it's funny, we think of the pig because that's the common thing that we eat. If you ever go back, when I taught Pentateuch, I got a chance to look through that again. If you ever look at the list of things they can't eat.
Oh, yeah.
Now, let me say this. Some of it, thank the Lord they can't eat it. I mean, the crawling things on the ground and everything else. Now, I don't want to eat that stuff. But there is a whole list of things. If I remember correctly, I think lobster's on that list, too.
Yeah,
That would not sit well with me.
the way they prepare their food too is
Yes, the preparation methods, exactly. That's what I'm saying, there's all kinds of things. Plus, frankly, also, think about this. What does a priest mean to a Jew, and what does a priest mean to a Gentile?
totally different.
Which also something else that we have to remember is, frequently in the church, there is this, I've actually had people say to me about things about how they take an Old Testament verse about a priest and apply it to a pastor. Priest is not a pastor. First off, priests weren't there to give sermons or anything like that. The priests were there to slaughter things primarily, to maintain the temple and things like that. There is nothing in common with the priest of the Old Testament and the pastor of the New Testament. If you're going to make an analogy, it's the believer of the New Testament with the priest of the Old Testament, because we are now the priests, with Christ being our high priest. But the point is that would have been something that the Jews wouldn't have really necessarily understood instinctively. To a Gentile, what's a priest mean? Back then.
Probably nothing.
Oh no, it meant something.
Is it what are they called? Pharisee?
No, that's Jewish. The priests, they were the guys in charge of the orgies in the temple. things like that.
Really?
Remember, the Gentile they had priests in the heathen religion and priestesses and stuff. You had in Ephesus in particular, you had the goddess Diana. Things like that, right?
They had
The fertility goddess. So
They
what was
have,
their
they have
right?
priests in those.
Oh, they had priests and
pagan
priestesses,
religions?
yeah.
Oh,
And
wow.
even in the Roman religions, they had the oracles, the people who were the seers and everything. They had all that.
Seers.
Yeah.
S-E-E-R.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Would that still be classified
Pagan
as prophet?
prophets. Pagan prophets.
Pagan prophet.
That's not what he means in verse 3, prophets, but yes, what's the Gentiles, my point being is this, even if we go to basic terminology, what is a priest? What is a prophet? You got two totally divergent attitudes. And let me say this, there is a big difference between a guy taking charge of an orgy and a guy who is sacrificing an animal, and none of them matches well, let me say this, hopefully none of them match pastors today.
Well,
I know, I found a couple of them at times. Sometime in this course, I'll probably end up telling you about the fake pastor that I found years ago. And I mean a guy who every degree was fake, everything in his life was fake, everything about him was fake. He was the pastor of a large church that I was a member of. And I happened to be the one who found him, and I had the pleasure of having 200 of my brothers down in the basement holding a counter-church service praying for my death. Because they thought it was wrong for me to expose the guy. Anyway, that's another story. Yeah. My point, but there is a reason for bringing that up later in Romans. I think you've heard that one before.
Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't get old.
No, and not only that, if you've been through it, you go like, oh gee, what you think are your Christian brothers can do some very strange things to you. Anyway, point is, back with this now. When we get to verse 8 and verse 8 through 17, and we're going a little fast in this, we're going to slow down as we get to these special topics, okay? Paul starts to talk about what he's doing, why he's there. The one thing we've already discussed, so we're not going to spend much time on it, is the fact that it was probably not apostolically founded. That is important. Because remember, that's the reason this book exists, in my opinion, is the fact that it wasn't an apostle that came there and taught him. It wasn't Paul that taught him. He couldn't make it there. And it also, again, shows that Peter did not found the church in Rome. That's one of the things a Catholic would have to answer. How do you have 111 and Peter being the founder of the church in Rome? They don't go together.
Can I
Now,
ask a question?
yeah, sure, go ahead.
In verse 8,
Yeah.
it says that, it says, first I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, because your faith is being proclaimed throughout the world. Is that a prophecy?
I don't think I wouldn't call it prophecy, no.
Because at the time, they didn't know much about the world, right?
True.
They only knew about their section.
Yeah, well, yes and no. That's kind of a they didn't know about North America. Okay. Well, I shouldn't even say that. There might have been some knowledge of that because there's pretty good evidence that people came to North America long before
Right,
Columbus. But in addition to that, you ever heard the phrase "all roads lead to Rome"?
Right.
There's a reason for that. Literally, they built roads throughout the entire known world. And I mean, now, I'm not saying you go all the way to Britain or something like that, but for example, there were Roman legions in Britain. Britain was a long ways off. There were Roman legions that would go up at time and have conflict with the Germanic kings and stuff like that. There were supposedly church tradition, don't know if it's true or not, where Thomas went to India as a missionary. We know that 300 years earlier, Alexander the Greek, who I also could have brought a coin of but didn't, Alexander the Greek went and fought with the Indians and the Indian Indians, not the American Indians and stuff like that. So there was probably a lot better knowledge of the world than any of us realized. Let me throw something at you here, okay? Again, don't believe what you hear necessarily. 1492, Columbus sailed over North America, right? We all know about that one. We've all heard about that one. What have we heard that Columbus's men were all afraid of might happen if they got too far out away from fall off the end of the earth? Right. Okay. Did you ever think about the fact that even the Greeks not only knew the earth was round, but knew the size of the earth because of geometry or because of trigonometry? Within probably 100 miles, they already figured it out. This knowledge was not lost. You know where that story about Columbus's men falling off the end of the earth came from?
The Catholic Church?
Nope.
Spain?
1822 or 26, I think. Washington Irving, a fictional story written by Washington Irving, talks about that. And then an atheist who was a French took that story and deliberately made it to make Christians look stupid. See, the Christians were so stupid they thought they were going to fall off the earth. Absolutely false. We see it in history books after history book. It's absolutely false. We can trace back exactly where it came from, exactly where it started. There's absolutely no truth to the fact that his men believed they'd fall off the edge of the earth. They knew it was round. So my point being is that just what was I talking about? Sorry. No.
About the verse about how.
Oh yeah, about that. I think they knew a lot more about the world than we give them credit for.
I thought Paul felt like the edge of the world was probably Spain.
Yeah,
Because he mentions
edge
the
of the
world.
known world, but not the end of the world, if you know what I'm saying. Just
Okay.
that's all they. That's
'Cause it
as
knows-
far east as they knew.
I was
Okay,
going
yeah.
to say the world could be only what they do at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
But they knew about Europe. They knew about Spain. They knew about Asia. They knew about the trading areas and stuff like that.
Yeah,
They knew about Africa. I mean, this
Right.
was all. What I'm saying is not as much as you think as far as hidden. Yes, it's not like they had, the internet. They could go look it up
Right.
on quick, but probably knew a lot more than we give them credit for.
Mhm.
Anyway, now, in addition to that, I already mentioned again, I'm going to a little bit of this review because I had to hit it in the introduction. The fact that this may well indicate why Paul wrote this book. I think it does indicate why he wrote it, that it was not apostolically founded and that he couldn't get there. 13 and 14, Paul's primary mission was to Gentiles. I probably don't have to go over that, we all know that. Now, 16 and 17 we've already read, but this is an important verse, and Moo considers it the theme of the entire book. And that is that he is not ashamed of the gospel, and all is built on that. That is important. I don't want to minimize it, but I think that is just something that's linked in as far as that goes. I mean, even if you look, the very first words of 16, I'm not going to explain why in Greek it's the second word, but in English it's the first word, and it's important. But what's the first word? For. You don't start a sentence with for unless it's linked to something right before that, okay? So from that standpoint, I don't know, and not only that, first word of 18 is for. So after you finish 17, you're right back into the flow. It's not stopping. That's what I'm trying to say. My point being is that I think it's important, but I think it shortchanges the book to say that's the whole theme of the book. Okay. Now, 18 through 20, 19 and 20, all of a sudden we're going to get to discuss something, and we're going to get into more detail here. Like you're going to find in this course, those first 17 verses, I did quick. We just kind of skimmed them, okay? Then we're going to take others and we're going to go, okay, we need to slow down for these 3 verses or something like that. Okay, so we'll get interesting there. Let me get back to 17. Here's what's critical. First words of 17 say, for it is the righteousness of God, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. What we're going to start seeing here through Romans is salvation is not our righteousness. It never has been our righteousness. It's God's righteousness in Jesus Christ applied to our account. We never get our own righteousness for salvation to go into heaven. It's Christ's righteousness that allows us to go to heaven, and we're going to get, especially in chapter 3, we're going to deal with the mechanism that happens through, okay? But remember here, and you'll see it in Moo's book also, he does a good job of covering that, the righteousness that gets us into heaven is not our righteousness, it's Jesus Christ's righteousness, God's righteousness. And that's an important distinction. So, and the reason I bring that up also is what we were talking about before class, between the break. Well, how in the world, what did we do, by the way, to screw up Christ's righteousness that we need more forgiveness for?
Right.
Can't do it.
First John.
Exactly. All right, now we're back in Romans. Back on 118 through the rest of chapter 1, all of a sudden Paul is now going to talk specifically about the Gentile idea of salvation, okay? And I hate to even use the word salvation, and here I use the term enlightenment. Gentiles weren't thinking so much about salvation, especially when he mentions the Greeks. They were talking about becoming more enlightened, becoming more self-aware, becoming more aware. Oh, it's a lot of, in some ways, like we do with the New Age movement today, and things like that. Some of them were talking salvation, but not in the way we mean salvation at all, okay? The point he's trying to make here is, he's going to deal now with how Gentiles try to make themselves acceptable to their gods, okay? And the fact is that it's a rat hole to try to run down into, and we're going to see that. But remember, what's he trying to do in these first 3 chapters? He's trying to say, you can't do it, you can't do it, you can't do it.
Right.
That's why we're going to start with the Gentiles and go from there. Okay. Now, could somebody read, somebody read 18 through 20 very quickly, whoever's got it.
For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. You said to 19?
Through 20.
20. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made.
Okay. Now, question for you. What is that talking about, especially 19 and 20?
Natural revelation.
Natural revelation. What is natural
It's
revelation?
like seeing God in creation, seeing God in
Right.
things that it's not reading it out of your
Right.
dreams.
The equivalent of taking my smartphone here, sometimes not all that smart, but my smartphone here, and saying, gee, I wonder how that evolved.
Right.
Okay. There is intelligent design that's obvious there, which says we need to know the creator. Okay. Now, question is, it comes up all the time to start with is not only about did people actually hear the gospel and everything, but the point is, first question that comes up here is natural revelation enough to be saved?
It can be, depending.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, like tribes of, say, like some foreign distant land who's never had the gospel or had anybody talk to them about Christ, but they have special revelation. They can see creation. They can see.
That's natural revelation. Special revelation
Oh,
is
I'm
the
sorry.
Bible.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're talking about.
Is natural revelation enough to be saved?
That's what I'm saying. So like creation is around them.
Okay.
They have some sort of evidence that a higher being exists.
Okay.
And it is my position that if they have that evidence that some sort of higher being exists, that God can speak to them through creation and things like that. And they can be moved in that direction to be at one with God, and that they don't necessarily need, the scriptures
To know about Jesus Christ?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you back that up from the Bible?
I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay. Next. No, we'll take this all. Honestly, that's one position. Okay. I'm not trying. Yeah, that's one
No,
position.
yeah.
But that's. You had your hand up. See, back.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, no, go for it. That's okay.
Well, I disagree that you cannot be saved exclusively off of natural revelation.
You can't.
You cannot be saved
Right,
exclusively
exactly.
off natural
I got
revelation.
you, I got you.
One, because it's not enough to lead exactly to the God of the Bible. I mean, you can discern that whoever created everything definitely has eternal power, definitely has some artistic creativity, but is it more than one being? There are other questions that it doesn't specifically say Christ. And to even use the scripture that was used, Jesus said that he's the way, the truth, and the life, no man can come to the Father.
Right. But you could always argue, well, he is the way to truth, but on the other hand, even though he's the way to truth, that doesn't mean they have to know his name or know about him, right?
No.
Because
Okay.
Romans
But-
chapter 10, verse 9.
I'm trying
Wait a
to.
second.
Okay.
Wait a
Yeah.
second.
Out of context, but applicable.
If somebody
Okay.
who's never heard about Christ,
Mhm.
never heard the word of God,
Right.
they die,
Right.
where do they go?
Okay. Question. Are you speaking now from biblical position, or are you speaking from an emotion of it's not fair?
I'm being an antagonist.
Understand? And here's the reason I'm asking. What I'm saying is this. One of the reasons I think the position you espouse is usually taken by people is because otherwise they think God is not fair if he
Well,
does
yeah,
this. Okay?
But see, that's why it is my position
I understand.
that people can know God through
Right.
natural revelation because, I mean,
Otherwise God wouldn't be fair.
I'm not saying that he, I mean,
I know, it's a bit, yeah.
God is fair. I do think he is fair.
Okay.
In he's merciful.
Okay.
He's also just.
Okay.
The word says he's just.
Right. We'll get into that in a minute.
I think it
Okay.
shows his creation, his
Right.
capability, his power.
There you go.
But it still can deny the power of Jesus Christ himself, as the dear brother said here, that you have to come through Jesus Christ himself. And I don't know if this is out of context, but it says faith come by hearing the word of God. So at a certain point, you can know of God, you can, and that's why you hear the word of God all the time. But what God are you talking about? It could be any God in it. But
Well, it could be the God
false
within. It could be the God
the
within
God
us, as some people
within
say.
you. So
Not that I believe that.
Right.
the word of
It's on
God,
tape, I gotta be
the
careful.
Holy Spirit,
You don't gotta make sure you
the
cover it.
word draws people to Jesus Christ himself. It's really getting them to
Well,
know Jesus.
let me ask you another question. If you're right, and we send missionaries to those tribes, aren't we actually doing them a disservice? Because after all, once they know about Christ, they can reject Christ.
Now you're
And
bringing
if that's the case, all of a sudden, aren't we actually damning them to hell by sending missionaries to them?
But that's what the word does.
I mean, then you're doing away with the
The
point of
fancy.
natural revelation.
No, we're not. Here's why. I understand, let me jump in here. I understand where you're coming from. First off, many people, honestly, it's a matter of trying to be fair, okay? One of the things I will say, we don't have time to go over it here. If we were to do an in-depth study of both predestination and free will, all of a sudden, I think this would become much more
This would
clear.
be literally class outside of Romans and
I know,
class
that's
on
we
predestination.
can't do that, okay? However, by the way, I am what I call a free will Calvinist.
Okay.
Yeah, which may sound strange, but if I were to explain it, you go, now I know what he's
I
saying.
would definitely
Okay.
love to hear that.
Yeah, here's the point. That's another class, definitely. Here's the point, though. Actually, we make it through it partway through this. I think one of the other chapters we may hit that. Here's the point. What we're trying to do is come up with essentially a democratic way that no one's excluded from salvation, okay? I would say several things. Number one, I don't think what you say can be supported from the Bible. However, number two, I would also make the argument every person has had the gospel already presented to them at multiple times. You might say, well, how? Okay, number one, when Adam and Eve were there, everybody knew the gospel. And it didn't get passed down to everybody maybe, but everybody on the planet had the gospel. At the time of Noah, everybody knew, hey, Messiah's coming, you got to believe in the Messiah. There's 8 people, okay? From what I see at the time of Paul, some people will say, well, Christ can't come back yet because the gospel hasn't gone to every tribe and every nation. I actually disagree with that. I think it probably did, and that was part of the reason for Paul doing the persecutions. I think it already was presented to them. It says 3 times already the entire earth has had the gospel. Now, one question I have is, that's an axe I'd have to go back and look, to be honest with you. Here's the thing, though. One of the things that starts happening is this. We say, well, maybe that individual hasn't had it. We had the same thing, for example, if your parents were alcoholics, for example. You would suffer the consequences of your parents' actions, even though you're not being punished for their actions. You would have the consequences of living with, you might have broken families, you might have all kinds of stuff. I've known a lot of children and grandchildren of alcoholics who really screwed up lives, and it wasn't their own fault. But the point being is it God's fault because their parents didn't pass it down to their children, who didn't pass it down to them? So first off, I think God in that respect has been fair in that he has given the gospel to the entire world 3 times, at least, okay? In addition to that, we make the assumption that everyone could turn to the God on his own. I believe that there is a free offer of salvation to every person on the earth. That is a legitimate offer. But by our nature, no one will accept that offer without the Holy Spirit opening their eyes and revealing to them.
That's right.
So that's where I start getting into free will predestination stuff, okay? The point being is that the fact that we're seeing entire tribes that have been lost, they weren't chosen by God to start with to be predestined. Now, number 2, you ask a very fair question. If this isn't enough to be saved, why does Paul even bring it up? Okay? Is Paul trying to show how a Gentile can be saved in chapter 1? Is he?
No.
No.
He's already told
He's
the
trying to
believers.
show in chapter 1, you
But you
can't be
cannot.
saved. Here are your false premises, and here's how I start. And what he's starting to say is this. Not that you can be saved through natural revelation, but that you have no excuse. Because natural revelation shows you there's a God. But it's not enough to be saved by, but it is enough to condemn a person by. And as I said, the point is that in truth, if we talk about what's truly fair, everybody goes to hell.
Right.
That's fair. And the fact that God chose some and didn't choose others doesn't make God fair, because it was a legitimate offer to everyone, but no one will take that offer on their own of their own initiative without the Holy Spirit opening their eyes in some special way. So I think that's what we're coming down to here, is that what Paul's actually saying is there is a legitimate reason why you are condemned. For one thing, in 21 on, Paul doesn't say, okay, you know about this, and if you followed this, you'd be good. No, he's starting to say, and from here you missed that, and then you went downhill from here, and you went downhill from here, and you went downhill from here. Chapter 18 through the end of the chapter is a spiraling down of Gentile civilization. Okay? So, my point being is, everything you're saying makes sense. I don't think it's biblical. But, I mean, I'm not trying to criticize you on that. I don't think it's actually what they're trying to get at. I think what Paul's saying is, this is the false way. And this is the problem. You can't get there this way, even though natural revelation does point out that God is who he says he is. Because don't forget, a lot of people who get natural revelation turn to idols, turn to this, turn to that, turn to pagan. The Temple of Diana was probably based on natural revelation and things like that.
Right.
So therefore you end up with problems as far as that goes. All right, and next, in addition to that, and like I said, we're starting to get a little bit more into, at least digging into a few verses. I wish we had time, honestly, I wish we had 6 months to do Romans. We don't. It would be a great course to do. Actually, I've done it in my church. I've done it in one church already. We took almost 2 years to do it. It took 20 months to do Romans for about an hour and a half a night.
Wow.
I've been doing it faster in the church that I'm in right now. We do about almost an hour every morning. We started in January and we just finished chapter 8.
Every morning at the church?
Every Sunday morning,
Oh,
sorry,
okay.
every Sunday, not every morning, but still, the point, and I'm not hitting everything that way either,
Right.
but, there's a lot to cover in here, I wish we had time for it. But, we're gonna cover it all anyway. Now, what I was gonna say is, the biggest thing is, this means that Gentiles man is without excuse. No one has an excuse of saying, gee, I didn't know, because the problem is, we're all sinners, we've all violated God's law, like it or not, and not only that, there is something within every one of us that knows we're doing right and wrong. We may not know about Mosaic laws or other laws and things like that, which, by the way, that's going to be a big topic in this course too. Does the Mosaic law still exist or things like that? And what does he mean when he talks about law? But the point is, everyone knows they're doing something wrong. I would say this, there is one exception in my opinion, and that is, I do believe the grace of Christ covers someone who is born, or not born, someone who dies before they ever reach an age where they can even comprehend salvation. So I can believe, for example, when an infant dies, I believe they're saved.
I agree with
Right.
you.
But I didn't come to that position because I said that's what my fairness tells me. I came to that position by doing a deep theological study of the book of Romans and came to that position. And now, when a grieving parent says to me what's going on, I can actually say to them, look, it's not just my opinion. I can even show you from the Bible someday if you want why your child is in heaven. The biggest thing we see on that is people say, well, David said, I'm going to see my son in paradise when his son died. That doesn't mean anything about infant salvation. I'll tell you why. That could simply be the grieving words of a grieving father that are faithfully recorded in the Bible. That's not theology. And my point is, other places, though, I think we can prove that. But for the people that are the heathen tribes, their tribes have already had the gospel. They rejected it. And sometimes we pay for the consequences of what people ahead of us already did, even though it's not their sin we're paying for. We each have our own sin for that. Now, we start getting into this, and if you look, in 21 and 22, a couple big things, is that they, even though they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks, which kind of goes into what we're talking about there. Knowing God is different from knowing Jesus Christ and knowing God the Father, etc. But they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. So what we got here is a situation where what they're trying to do is they're trying to reason with their intellect. And what's amazing to me is the number of times, I think of this. If you were to sit and listen to an evolutionist talk, and I mean, well, macroevolution, not microevolution, but that's another class I taught. If you were to talk to evolution about the evolution of the planet, evolution of humans and things like that, they would have an unbelievable amount of knowledge usually. Okay, and they could step you through the Neanderthal man and the Big Bang and everything else. And I've been through all of that, okay? I've taught on that stuff. My point is that it sounds good a lot of times. It sounds highfalutin and everything else. If you know science, it's garbage. You don't have to know the Bible to know that evolution is garbage. And as a matter of fact, just by using the laws of thermodynamics, I could disprove evolution. And the physicists even know there's a problem, and they're trying to hide it because they've gotten to the point where they're going like, uh-oh, how do we handle this? And some physicists are finally saying, we got to look for a creator because there's no other answer, okay? My point is, though, if you think about it, how many people do you know that try to become wise, and the more wise they become, the more foolish they sound if you really look? It's almost like the emperor has no clothes story. The fact is, they become fools. And this verse here, to me, sums up so much what I see in science, so much in politics, so much in other parts of the world, where people think they've become wise by no longer needing God, they've rejected God and everything else. We've become a postmodernist society and all this, and the fact is, all they've done is become fools.
Right.
And that's what this is talking about here. So again, we've taken another level of descent. They rejected God, now they've become fools in their wisdom. Yeah.
Do you think Paul here means literal fools, like to be foolish, or usually we see foolish being like moral degenerates?
Foolish? No, I don't think he means moral degenerates here. We're getting to that. I think
but like
he means
they literally are. This
idiotic.
person
Let me see if it is here. One of the things interesting is the word fool. I think it's in the genitive. If I remember correctly, the Greek word for fool, one of the Greek words, moron.
Really?
Yeah, so it's like, we've
What does Greek literally
right,
mean?
that gives you an idea, right. Well, for example, we're going to hit, actually earlier on, we had the Greeks and the barbarians. The Greek word for barbarian is barbarian. So, I mean, there's some words we've taken straight over. Baptism and baptizo also, same type of thing. But the point is here, if I remember correctly, I'm almost certain that it's the genitive of one, I think it's the genitive for the word fool is moron.
Okay.
So that gives you an idea, okay, that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about there.
But we're not supposed to use the word fool or call someone a fool.
Oh, let me say this, another subject which we're going to hit, what did Christ mean when he said things in the Sermon on the Mount? We're actually going to have to discuss that when we come to our last class on judgment among Christians. Okay? Honestly, that's taken. Now, I do not believe we should go around saying you fool. I don't believe that's first of all, I don't think it's a good tactic.
But
Okay?
if someone said
However-
there is no God, there are.
However, they, by their own words, make themselves a fool. And secondly, I think there may be times to use that word, because here's the thing, I think Christ's words are taken dramatically out of context in the Sermon on the Mount.
Okay.
Okay. But here's the point. In general, no, I don't think it's a good idea to go around and say, if you weren't such an idiot, you'd accept the gospel. I mean,
Yeah.
brilliant marketing technique.
Yeah.
Okay, we gotta,
But biblically,
biblically, they're calling themselves fools. Yes. Biblically, I can stand here and I can say, evolutionists, by their own words, have become fools. I think that's appropriate for me to say. Now, I don't go up to evolutionists and go, you fool. Right. Because it's not. Now, what I will do, though, is I will say to them, let's talk about evolution. Let's talk about the laws of thermodynamics. Let's talk about probability. Let's talk about the fact of when you go from species jumps, macroevolution, you keep looking for a missing link. Forget your missing link. You need 2 missing links for every sexual creature, not one. One male, one female, and they both have to appear at the same point in time at the same spot. Otherwise, your missing link just died and never reproduced. And you can't even come up with one missing link. And that's not even as strong as the thermodynamic argument. The thermodynamics just utterly disprove evolution. Another class. If they ever teach Pentateuch, if they have Pentateuch again here and they let me teach it again, take that one.
They let me.
No, I think they move me around is what I mean. I did
No,
Pentateuch
no.
once. Creation and Fall, we hit that also, though.
Right.
Creation and Fall, we probably actually had 2 hours in that class, which was specifically on evolution, thermodynamics, the different,
Nice.
why the different types of men were. Yeah, I love teaching that stuff. Another story. Anyway, the point is, what we're seeing now is we've gone from rejecting God to becoming fools in their wisdom. Now, we're going to get over to what you said. Is this a moral fool or is this a foolish fool? Well, all of a sudden in 23 and 24, 26, and 28, all of a sudden we've got, and exchange the glory of the incorruptible God for the image of the form of the corruptible man and of birds. Let's talk about idols right here. Then, therefore God gave them over, because of this, God gave them over to the lust of their hearts to impurity, that their bodies might be dishonored among them, for they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Amen literally just means, yes, this is so. Okay? For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions, for the woman exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. In the same way also, the men abandoned the natural function of the women and burned in their desire, wondering, okay, going on with this. A couple of questions that come up. Number one, is this actually talking about homosexuality or not? Because right now you're going to hear a lot of people say this really isn't what this means. It's either mistranslated. It's not talking about homosexuality. It's not talking about things like that.
starting in verse 22.
Start that whole area we were just covering. Is that actually talking about homosexuality or something else?
Who are they talking?
That's what I thought the first time I read it.
Okay, do you still think it?
Every single pastor that's ever read it said it's
It
homosexual.
says it that way, yeah.
It is. Now, let me say, it's not a trick question. The reason I say this, I have run into a number of people in the last 10 years who are literally saying, no, that's not what this is talking about. We're going to talk in a minute about why it's talking about it is, okay? But here's the other thing, too. I think it goes into more than just homosexuality in that it's clearly identifying homosexual behavior. But what it's saying is complete debauchery, leaving the natural function, etc. So this is more than just saying homosexuality is bad. This is saying this is a cultural thing, this is a way of life, and I think it would include things besides homosexuality, but he's specifically singling those things out here. You can't get around that it includes them. Yeah, go ahead. Then I'll...
Okay, you kind of answered my question because I was going to ask, does this particular passage kind of reveal this sin in a different way? Because this sin seems to be presented as a punishment for denying
Well, I
What
wouldn't,
is?
it's not a punishment for denying. If you look, it
Because
doesn't
it says
say.
for this reason.
Yeah, but it doesn't say this. It does not say that God forced them to do this.
Right,
It
right,
says,
right, right.
It says gave them over
Allowed
to
them
their
to
lust.
do.
Right.
Yeah.
So basically, this isn't punishment. This is the natural result.
Okay, no.
Homosexuality
okay.
is the natural result of abandoning
denying.
God. Now, let me ask you this. Think about this.
That's
Start with.
That's a crazy premise.
Well, no, it's not. Think about this.
I mean, amazing
No, I don't-
crazy.
Yeah, but think about this. Okay, right. Here's what I was going to say. If there was no God, man was then not made in the image of God. Man and woman. If there's no God, what right do we possibly have to condemn homosexuality or anything else for that matter?
Right,
We don't.
right.
Why isn't homosexuality just as normal as heterosexuality? The reason it's not according to us is because man was created in God's image, and God intended for man and woman to procreate, not just procreate, to enjoy each other in sex, things like that. Okay, He did not intend man and man to enjoy each other and things like that. Okay, so the point is that it is talking about that, but a couple of things I want to hit here. Okay, number one, that idea of God giving them over to do what they want. One of the questions that has come up is kind of like, well, does that mean that, God kind of forced them into it? I'm going to send all of you another paper that I wrote when I was in seminary. It's only 2 or 3 pages long. You don't have to read it, but I think you'll enjoy it. Called Who Hardened Pharaoh's Heart? Okay? Because we always have this question, well, was it God's fault for that? Because after all, was Pharaoh really controlling himself? Because don't forget, you know what I'm saying, it says he hardened his heart. What you're going to find is there's actually 3 different Hebrew words which are all translated as the same English word, and they have different meanings. If you read the paper, you'll understand, no. It was not. In the end, what God did was confirm Pharaoh's own desires in his heart.
Yeah.
And then gave him over. In the beginning, it wasn't even that, and as I said, if you want to know more on that, paper will explain it. But my point being is, same thing
That's
here.
interesting.
God's allowing them to have their own desires and be confirmed in their own heart. He's not forcing them at any point in time. Now, in addition to that, 26, I think, is, when you talk about women exchanging the natural function for what is unnatural, and men burning for abandoning women burning for other men, I will say this. You rarely would see it translated this way, but in 27, literally, and I'm only saying literally, if you took the Greek, where it says men with men, okay? If I were to translate that literally, it would be men in men or men inside men. So it's actually even a little bit more, because I've had people, oh no, if you go to the Greek, it really doesn't say that. The Greek's disgusting in this case, okay? My point being is that, no, you can't get around the fact that this is talking about homosexuality. However, here's the problem we got sometimes. Sometimes we set homosexuality up as this horrible, horrible sin that's worse than all the other sins type thing. No, the homosexuality is kind of like one of the end results of the natural result of rejecting God. So the first thing you got to look at is, if I'm talking to I have homosexual friends. Do I participate in their activities? Of course not. Do I have friends? Let me say this. I have non-believers who are homosexuals that I'm friends with. Believers, if they want to openly practice and advocate it, then I probably would have to say, I really can't, But even then, I've had homosexual believer friends also who had trouble controlling it. And, I've talked to them about, okay, trying to help, whatever. But the point being is, sometimes we set this into this special category where if they do that, that's just it. Adultery, well, that's okay. Homosexuality, no way. Well, wait a second. Adultery's screwing up an entire family. Don't tell me adultery is any better than homosexuality is. Okay? What's happening here isn't so much that it's saying it's the worst sin. What he's saying is it's completely abnormal and unnatural.
Right.
And it's the fact of rejecting God completely that leads to that abnormality and that unnaturalness. So don't feel, like I said, not only that, I've known homosexuals who become Christians. So don't feel like, oh, they've done that, forget it, their life is over. No, not at all. It's just something we got to realize. This is a natural result of turning away from God. And think about it. If evolution's true, there's no reason for us to say homosexuality is wrong if evolution's true. We would never right to. The only reason we can say it's wrong is because there are natural ways that God set things up.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I want to bring you a paper. It's written by a pastor.
Hmm?
He's Methodist or Protestant or something.
Yeah.
He's a homosexual,
Mhm.
and he's written a case for homosexuality.
Yeah,
And-
I've seen a lot of those,
Oh,
yes.
it's happening in our culture now.
Yeah, Methodist and Episcopalian and ones like that in particular and things like
And
that, yeah.
it's like his
Yeah.
theology basically advocating for homosexuality.
Right.
And I brought it to another professor at Watch the Bible, and he couldn't debunk.
I'll take a look at it.
And I wanted to
Sure.
bring it to you.
You want to say also if you want to email it to me in the meantime or something like that, I'll do it. Sure, I'll be happy to. Yeah.
I was actually, me and some other, like my believer friends, we were like doing some research about it. And we discovered, and I only tell this to certain believers because I don't even think, like the weightiness of this just scared me. But you know that there's a coalition of LGBT
Oh, yes.
theologians who
I know.
have rewritten
Absolutely.
passages of the Bible, and it's called the
Yeah.
Queen's James.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that one, but yeah, I believe it.
And that's,
Not only that,
and it's
yeah.
that, I mean, that's the scariest.
Right.
Like, I almost cried when I
Yeah.
saw that we've gotten that far.
And don't forget, there's gay pastors now and things
Yeah.
like that.
Right.
And there's, on and on and
But
on.
you
Gay and
literally
lesbian
changed
pastors.
you literally changed the word of God to fit
Yes.
your theological perspective.
Right, exactly.
And I mean that was like the straw. Like I was almost to a point where we were going to email.
Kind of reminds you of the word depraved, doesn't it?
Right.
Now, the reason
right.
I say that, look at verse 28. What's it lead to? Depraved mind. That's what it's talking about. But everything you're talking about here supports into that. But all I'm trying to say is this. Don't come away with the idea that homosexuality is this one sin that's so much more terrible than all the others. It's not that. It's that it's symbolic of the depravity of man when we turn our back on God. So that's why I bring this. I think that's the reason Paul's bringing it up. Not to say, hey man, this is the end of the line here. Yeah.
Do you think going just a question from verse 28?
Yeah.
We see here that having a depraved or debased mind is a result of being an unbeliever. But do you think that believers can be subject to that if they are continual patterns of sin? I've heard a lot of
Let me say,
Christians
if
say that.
if you're a believer, you're going to stay a believer. But there are believers who fall into bad sin, and who it does affect their mind. Yes. So yeah, I believe that can certainly happen. Now let me say this: I don't think the Holy Spirit's going to let you get away without conviction.
Right.
But yes, certainly it can happen as far as that
I
goes.
think like if you are a believer, and sometimes you meet people who say who just live in a constant sin, I think that you should re-examine yourself. I mean,
Let me say, a lot of people who say,
Yeah.
a lot of people who say they're believers are not.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I agree with you.
yeah.
But there are also believers who literally get into habitual sin and can't get out of it, and they're believers.
Mhm.
I mean, if we were to look at our life, I bet every one of us could find something. Yeah, maybe we're not homosexuals, we're not this, we're not that. Okay, but maybe there's some little sin that we forget about that, yeah, we do that every day, but it's not a big deal to God.
Right.
We many times fall into habitual sin, so one thing I would say is habitual sin is not the definition of whether you're a Christian or not. Christians sin and Christians sin habitually at times too. And sometimes that gets mixed up where the 1 John 1:9 thing gets translated as, well, it means habitual sin. That gets, no, it
What if
doesn't.
you're not convicted? If your spirit is not disturbed?
Oh, let me, well,
I think that's what.
you know something?
Right.
Let me pause this for a second. I'll tell you why. This is going to be a big one that we're going to discuss in detail, I think around chapter 11, 12, 13. No, this is dealt with in Romans, specifically. And I was going to say, this becomes important. Like, what if your spirit's not convicting you?
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, well, Paul deals with that. And sometimes, you know what the problem is sometimes? Sometimes the problem is you're not actually sinning. But this is a whole ball of wax. 13, 14.
That's the funniest thing.
And there are other times when they are sinning. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
There's nobody who's going out there and committing adultery or homosexuality. And, oh, that's okay for them. No. But however, like I said, we're going to get in. We will. I promise. We'll get into this later on in the course in detail because this is a big topic. Okay. All right. Now, again, something I think that's critical here. Remember, we're talking about the path of Gentiles spiraling out of control for trying to find righteousness, and instead, they just go down a path of unrighteousness. Now, what happens as we pass 28 and 29? We got the depraved mind in 28, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, malice, there, gossip, slander, etc., all this, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful, and although they know the ordinance of God, basically they know the law of God, not necessarily the Mosaic law or anything else, but they know right from wrong. Although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but they also give hearty approval to those who practice them. Tolerance.
That's
That's the word, tolerant. That's what Paul's talking about. You just take your Bible if you want, just write the word tolerance for next to verse 32. Because you know something? We are at the point of hearty approval, even and our country is better than most of the world. We are at the point of hearty approval of most sin. Not just homosexuality, but abortion on demand and things like that. That is talking about not only, think about it, that is now a right of privacy according to the judges. It is also something where it is a woman's right. Now I agree, I'm a big defender of individual liberties. But an individual liberty is only a liberty if it doesn't destroy someone else's liberty.
Yeah.
And then you've got to look at it. And in this case, let me say this. I do believe that if there's a case where a child simply decides to become an embryo and goes and finds a woman and stalks her and implants himself in her, then maybe there's a case for self-defense there or something, okay? But trust me, and let's not even discuss rape right now. It's kind of a separate issue we can talk about. That's not in this class. The point is, here's the point. If we're talking about rape, we're talking about a tiny, tiny percentage of the actual pregnancies that are aborted. Super small number. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but a super small number. The majority of them is, it's not people that got raped. It's, I wanted to have sex and do it my way, in or out of marriage, frequently outside of marriage, and now I don't want to live with the results and consequences.
Right.
It is no longer, you know what the person had the right to do? The person had the right to not have sex.
That's right.
Once they get pregnant, nothing against women here, because trust me, the guys are involved in pregnancy too, okay? Once they get pregnant, it's no longer their right to their body alone because there's two bodies involved.
I think that's the issue, is that they don't agree that that's a because
Right.
how many
They don't
issue
believe
here is it's my
Well, you know
body, I can
something?
do what I want.
You know something? That when it was first decided with Roe v. Wade in the 70s, it was debated heavily on the idea of is it alive or is the embryo or fetus alive or not. If you'll notice, that's not even the issue anymore for many, many years by those who want to promote it. They can't defend that because science is now showing it's garbage as far as that goes.
Right. I mean,
But
if we found water on Mars, we would consider that life.
Yeah.
So we have such an inconsistency of,
Right.
of what is
Right.
living and what's not.
But my point being is they redefine it. Here, look at what this is talking about.
Yeah.
Redefining morals, redefining our ideals, this is exactly what this is talking
Yeah.
about. Giving hearty approval to those. And one thing I have said before is, I don't think a country is in danger necessarily of God's judgment because there's homosexuals in it, or because there's abortions in it, or because there's adulterers in it.
Sin.
Yeah, it happens. But you know something? I do believe a country is in danger of God's judgment when they start giving approval to those things.
Right.
We've crossed that line.
Oh yeah.
Because we can all sin, and
Yeah.
you know it's on us, and we try to correct it. But
Right.
when we're saying it's actually
It's okay.
okay, you
Yeah.
can not.
It's
you
not
no
only
longer have
okay-
to feel ashamed of it. You can now go ahead and
Be
do
open.
it all the time.
But not only that,
openly do it.
worse yet, who are the people who need to be punished? The word they made up, the homophobes,
Yeah.
the people who are against abortion, those are the people who need to be punished because they're not being tolerant. And after all, we live in a tolerant society. How could we possibly? You're going to see the day when Christians are persecuted a lot more than they are now.
But it's the
And that's gonna be the
Christians-
basis of
It's the Christians who are becoming tolerant. I think that he's. Do you think that he?
I think here what he's talking about is, I think he's specifically talking about the Gentiles themselves and what they're doing with their culture and stuff like that. This is not believers.
But do you think maybe as believers, when we become tolerant, do you think that we're held at a higher standard?
No, I think honestly, I think frequently we're too tolerant. Now let me say, I think, for example, a non-believing homosexual is a good example, okay? Would I show love to that person? Yes. Would I witness to them? Yes. Even if they didn't want to accept Christ, would I befriend? Would I have dinner with them?
Well,
Yeah.
that's not what I'm
But-
talking about.
But the tolerance is the point. When I start giving approval to what they do, that's another
That's
story.
what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's wrong. I don't believe that a believer should say to a homosexual, look, it's okay that you do that, it's not a sin.
That's what I'm talking about.
I
Do you
think-
think we're
yeah.
held at the higher standard?
Oh, then a non-believer? Yes, I do. Yeah, I actually do. I believe we're held to a higher standard because we already know the truth.
Because we know the truth. Yeah.
Right, and so if we turn around and we start saying, no, this is okay, don't worry about it, that's wrong. Now, again, does it mean we should, I know one believer who told me that he believed that it was wrong for us to not stone homosexuals. I disagree. No, seriously. It was wrong to not stone homosexuals today. I disagree with that, and I told him so. However, he believed in covenant theology, and he believed the Old Testament is still applicable to us today, and therefore
well, that
we'll be
makes
able to go
sense.
back. Right. And my point, we'll talk about that later on, trust me. Covenant theology is going to come up in this course. Okay.
Government, you said?
Hmm?
You said government?
Covenant theology.
Covenant, okay.
And that will come up when we start talking about what the law is.
Right, so speaking of not the biblical law, but
Mhm.
today's law, so what is your point of view or your emphasis on biblical theology related to Christians that make decisions by voting for certain laws, for certain political leaders?
I think Christians are going to be held accountable for their
Such as
votes.
presidents.
Yeah. I think
we're voting into office.
right, we are voting presidents
and
into
they're
office
passing laws for
who are
gay
promoting
marriages
abortion.
and abortions.
I think
So,
Christians will be held accountable for their votes. Now,
yeah.
that's between them and God, but I actually believe, and it has nothing to do with colors of presidents or parties or anything. Let me say this,
Absolutely.
there's a lot of Republicans that stink too as far as
Oh
politics
yeah,
goes.
absolutely.
But the thing I was going to say is, vote according to what you find to be biblically accurate. Now, and not only Christians to be active in politics because you're allowed to, but that's chapter 13. We'll get to that.
I can't wait to that.
Okay, now let's go to what I can say is the thing we got to see about this. Even though we're hitting specific topics like homosexuality, remember, keep it in context. The context is this is the failed way of how Gentiles try to make themselves acceptable to God. They're not making themselves acceptable to God. That's not what's happening, if you see what I'm saying. So this is what's going on here, and this is why it's kind of, again, sometimes you just have to remember this because it's something where it's easy to get hung up on 26 and 27 and just scream about homosexuals. That's not the main point there, even though it is absolutely true homosexuality is wrong and will always be wrong. But the main point is Gentile way of salvation doesn't work. You're not making yourself acceptable to God. So essentially, up to 32, Gentiles are scum, remember? Okay, now, chapter 2, Jews are scum. Again, let me say this. What I just said, taken out of context, that could make me sound terrible. If you didn't hear Gentiles are scum in chapter 1 and everybody's scum in chapter 3.